This is All Minus One Story Time with Bill. How are we doing today? So, I've been doing the Koof Great Reset every Monday, and on Thursdays, right now, I'm going to be doing Nihilism, the Root of the Revolution of the Modern Age by Eugene Rose, or Father Seraphim Rose. So, if you didn't catch this before, I started this last Thursday, and I actually did two segments to kind of get through some of this. So I'm going to scroll down here to about where I was, and we're going to pick right back up about nihilism in the modern age. So I was here. We were talking about truth. I think I left off around the relative truth mark, but I'm going to back it up just a little bit, and we're going to read, and we're going to talk about this. There is no truth. We have encountered this phrase already more than once in this book, and it will reoccur frequently hereafter. For the question of nihilism is, most profoundly, a question of truth. It is indeed the question of truth. But what is truth? The question is, first of all, one of logic. Before we discuss the content of truth, we must examine its very plausibility and the condition of its postulation. And by truth, we mean, of course, as Nietzsche's denial of it makes explicit, absolute truth, which we have already defined as the dimension of the beginning and the end of things. Absolute truth, the phrase has, to a generation raised on skepticism and accustomed to serious thought, an antiquated ring. No one surely is the common idea. No one is naive enough to believe in absolute truth anymore. All truth to our enlightened age is relative. The latter expression lets us note all truth is relative is the popular translation of Nietzsche's phrase, there is no absolute truth. The doctrine is the foundation of nihilism, alike the masses and of the elite. Now, interesting with this, when people talk about this and they're saying there is no truth, there is no absolute truth, or truth is subjective, any of those things, they are making a proclamation of truth. It's a pretty simple logical fallacy. Just say that there is no truth. Well, you're making a statement of truth. So you've defeated your own argument in your statement. And after that, there's really nothing to discuss. Like, people will go on about this and go, well, if there's truth, blah, 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 I could do this and do that. And often you'll have to go down these hypotheticals where you start talking about morality and all kinds of other stuff. And they have every excuse in the book to obfuscate the truth. The reality is that they like lies. That is the truth to these folks. They like lies that appeal to them emotionally because the truth can sometimes be hurtful. And for me, truth is the highest value. And I say that because most people place love above truth, but there is no love without first there being truth. Truth is justice. Truth is all of the right things that is God and justice and creation together. And if you think that truth is relative, then what you're saying is that there is no stable ground to anything. There is no reality to anything. It is whatever you wish to make it to be. And I will say it now. I will probably mention it again, but this is the idea that you are your own God. You're the own creator of your universe. You get to direct every ounce of your own fate, and create the world in which you wish to live around you. And to some degree, you have control over that, but to a large degree, you do not. You were born in the body you were born in. You have the capabilities you have. You can change them to some degree through effort, but the reality is you are trapped here, and you are trapped with yourself. And so you better get used to it, and you better start accepting the realities. And often when you accept the realities of life, life gets much easier. Anyways, let's get back here to this text. Relative truth is primarily represented for our age by the knowledge of science, which begins in observation, proceeds by logic, and progresses in orderly fashion from the known to the unknown. It is always discursive, cognizant, qualified, always expressed in relation to something else, never standing alone, never categorically, never absolute. Or categorical, never absolute. So it says the unreflective scientific specialist sees no need for any other kind of knowledge occupied with the demands of his specialty. He has perhaps neither time nor inclination for abstract questions that inquire, for example, into the basic presuppositions of his specialty. I talked about this last time because, again, I'm covering a little bit of what I covered at the end last time. So the preoccupation of his specialty, meaning laser-like focus and essentially being obtuse, not allowing any other perspectives in. This is just absolute absurdity, and it's a good way to fail in life. You need perspective. I talked about this yesterday sort of on my quick shot segment, and that I listen to folks I don't necessarily agree with all the time because I believe that they are truthful, they are honest actors, and they are giving you their honest opinions, even though sometimes their opinions are stupid. But see, a lot of people I'll talk to will say, well, I don't like punditry. Punditry's no good. They do all this spin, and they say this or that about the topic. They're expressing opinions, and it's important to hear opinions on topics because sometimes you come to a conclusion you wouldn't have come to on your own. The old saying, two heads are better than one. Punditry has its place. It doesn't mean that a pundit should be taken as what they have to say, their opinions, as truth, as fact. But it is something that you can take and put perspective on and go, this is how I can suss out the truth a little bit more. That's a good point that person made. Regardless, though, there is the objective truth, not just the opinions of folks, right? If he is pressed, or if his mind spontaneously turns to such questions, the most obvious explanation is usually sufficient to satisfy his curiosity. All truth is empirical. All truth is relative. Either statement, of course, is a self-contradiction. The first statement is itself not empirical at all, but metaphysical. The second is itself an absolute statement. The question of absolute truth is raised first of all. For the critical observer, by such self-contradictions, and the first logical conclusion to which we must be led is this. If there is any truth at all, it cannot be merely relative. The first principles of modern science, as of any system of knowledge, are themselves unchangeable and absolute. If they were not, there would be no knowledge at all. Not even the most reflective knowledge, for there would be no criteria by which to classify anything as knowledge or truth. Exactly. So this is the problem of categories that the postmodernists decide, there's no categories for anything. We can just blow it all up. That doesn't work because you don't act that way. You don't act that out. Jordan Peterson covers this very clearly in his books and his lectures. You act in the world as if things have purpose and meaning. You know what a cup is. It's funny, I have a little dog. My wife has a dog, more or less. And he's new to the family. We've had him for about a year because right after we went into lockdown, the dog she had for 11 years had passed away. And she immediately needed to get a new dog, which, whatever. And so this guy, he's pretty cool. He's pretty chill. He's whatever. He barks a little bit, but he's a little dude. It's not like this ferocious bark. It's not the worst thing. He knows immediately that a rug is something for him to lay on. He didn't have to think about it. He just goes over and he knows it. He gets certain things. He understands the usage of it. He knows when something is food, whether he likes it or not. He's actually rather particular, but he's very food motivated. So he's going to come over and see what kind of food you're getting into. Or like if I crack open a beer or something, he wants to know what that beer's about, even though he doesn't like beer. So the point is that he knows that there's something being ingested, something taken in, and he's curious about it. Or if there's a rug, like I got a new rug for our living room a while back, immediately he's like laying on it. He's there. He knew what that was, even though I had a bare floor before that. He wouldn't sit on the floor before that. He would sit on the rug by the door or in the kitchen, but nowhere else on the floor. So the point is just in this, simple animal's mind, he's acting in the world in a way in which he knows is reality and truth. There's no question in it because he can't reflect like a human being does. But those objects, those things have a purpose to him. He sees a rug or a mat and he thinks, oh, okay, that's something I can get comfortable on. And we do the same thing. We know, like I have a glass right here. It's pretty simple. I know that any cup, any glass like this is a glass. It's not because I have to think about it. I have to consciously process it. I see it. I understand it has a purpose. We know that certain objects like doorknobs or handles are doorknobs or handles. We don't think about that. There is a basic relative truth there to what they are. And so when you destroy and blow up all the categories, you're left with nothing to judge the world with. And again, Peterson talks about this with AI. They couldn't just figure it out. Certain things had to sort of be programmed in immediately. And a lot of it had to do with essentially their ability to learn to navigate the world, which is how we learn to navigate the world. We learn about categories. We learn that things have particular meaning. They have particular usages. This is very important basic stuff. So anyways, that's enough of my ramble. Let's get back to this. This axiom has a corollary. The absolute cannot be attained by means of the relative. That is to say, the first principle of any system of knowledge cannot be arrived at through the means of the knowledge itself, but must be given in advance. They are the object, not the scientific demonstration, but of faith. We have discussed in an earlier chapter the University of Faith. Now, guys, this is an excerpt from a book that wasn't really ever, it was written, but it was never printed anywhere except for this excerpt from what I understand. So go back to part 1 if you don't know that, because I read the preface from the editor, and that explains this. So it says, the universality of faith, seeing it as underlying all human activity and knowledge. And we have seen that faith, if it is not to fall prey to subjective delusions, must be rooted in truth. Absolutely. That is part of the logos. It is therefore a legitimate and indeed unavoidable question whether the first principles of the scientific faith, for example, the coherence and uniformity of nature and transsubjectivity of human knowledge, the adequacy of reason to draw conclusions from observation, are founded in absolute truth. If they are not, they can be no more than unverifiable probabilities. The pragmatic position, that's kind of sort of actually what unverifiable probabilities is sort of how quantum physics works, by the way. Something like that. I'm no expert in quantum physics, but I can just, sort of throw that out there real quick. The pragmatic position taken by many scientists and humanists who cannot be troubled to think about ultimate things, the position that these principles are no more than experimental hypotheses, which collective experience finds reliable, is surely unsatisfactory. It may offer a psychological explanation of the faith these principles inspire, but since it does not establish the foundation of the faith in truth, it leaves the whole scientific edifice on shifting sand and provides no sure defense against the irrational winds that periodically attack it. And this is sort of what I was saying. If there's no categories, there's no truth, there's no nothing, there's no ground to stand on, then we don't know how to act in the world. So this is just an inherent thing that is within us. And of course, he's taking this to a little bit deeper of a level in the philosophical realm. But again, you have to understand that there has to be categories. One of the reasons why the whole idea of the 52 million genders thing exists right now is to destroy the truth and destroy categories, because what will happen when the dictatorship comes in fully into place, they'll say, well, these are the categories that we say are true, but there is no truth. We dictate what the truth is, and we can shift it if we need. This is the big brother of Orwell's 1984, and Winston, being in the Ministry of Truth, knowingly tells lies, right? and everything shifts. And at the end of the book, he's not even sure if the events of the book happened because he was told that they weren't. They weren't happening. How can you do that? Well, you get a populace that is docile, that is weak-minded, that is physically weak, that is willing to be led as a debt slave, debt cattle, debt sheep, however you want to put it. And you basically say, no, this is the proper way to think. And if you don't think this way, we're going to excise you from the community. We're going to excise you from the larger processes of the world, and you're going to be off on your own. Guys, exile is a very, very strong tool. Human beings need each other to survive. It's not individualism and it's not collectivism. It's the amalgamation. It's like male versus female. It's not male and it's not female. It's the amalgamation of the two. We are complementary beings, and so is the community and the individual. Radical, hardcore individualism just barely exists. Collectivism, though, radical, hardcore collectivism, as in global collectivism, that, my friends, is super prevalent throughout the world. And that's what the nihilist movement, postmodernist, neo-marxist, nonsense, SJW, intersectionality, feminist, whatever else, trans rights, all of that is about this very thing. And again, it's meant to demoralize so that they can come in and say, hey, we're here to pick up the pieces. This is how you should think. In actual fact, however, whether it be from a simple naivety or from a deeper insight, which they cannot justify by argument, most scientists and humanists undoubtedly believe that their faith has something to do with the truth of things. Interesting, right? You always come back around. The logic is circular. Whether this belief is justified or not is, of course, another question. It is a metaphysical question, and one thing that is certain is that it is not justified by the rather primitive metaphysics of most scientists. I would agree. Every man, as we have seen, lives by faith. Likewise, every man, something less obvious, but no less certain, is a metaphysician. Physicist, I guess is what he means. The claim to any knowledge, whatever, and no living man can refrain from this claim, implies a theory and standard of knowledge, and a notion that what is utterly unknowable and true, this ultimate truth, whether it is conceived as the Christian God or simply as the ultimate coherence of things, is a metaphysical first principle. And guys, first principles are very, very important. An absolute truth, but with the acknowledgement, logically unavoidable, of such a principle, the theory of relativity of truth collapses, in itself being revealed as a self-contradictory absolute. Now, I said that without having all the fancy words in between. You're making a definitive statement of truth, that truth is relative. It's it's circular logic, it's contradictory, and therefore negates itself. The proclamation of a relativity of truth is thus what might be called a negative metaphysics, but a metaphysics all the same. There are several principal forms of negative metaphysics, and since each contradicts itself in a slightly different way, and appeals to a slightly different mentality, it would be wise to devote a paragraph here to the examination of each. We may divide them into the two general categories of realism and agnosticism, each of which in turn may be subdivided into naive and critical. Naive realism or naturalism does not precisely deny absolute truth, but rather makes absolute claims of its own that cannot be defended. Rejecting the ideal or spiritual absolute, it claims the absolute truth of materialism and determinism. That sounds like stuff I say, right? This philosophy is still current in some circles. It is official Marxist doctrine and is expounded by some unsophisticated scientific thinkers in the West, but the main current of contemporary thought has left it behind, and it seems today a quaint relic of a simpler but bygone day, the Victorian day, when many transferred to science the allegiance and emotions they had once devoted to religion. And again, this is the point that Nietzsche makes in Dostoevsky, which he brings up, of course, earlier in this. If you go back to the other portions of this I've done, and this is 100% true. It is the impossible formulation of scientific metaphysic impossible because science is, by its nature, knowledge of the particular, and metaphysics is knowledge of what underlies the particular, and it's presupposed by it. It is a suicidal philosophy in that the materialism and determinism it posits renders all philosophy invalid, since it must insist that philosophy, like everything else, is determined. Its advocates can only claim that their philosophy, since it exists, is inevitable, but not at all that it is true. Which is exactly what the Marxists believe. They believe that what they project for the future, the fall of capitalism and the rise of Marxism and global Marxism, and setting everyone in some sort of harmony of materialistic utopia, that they believe that is some long off future that is inevitable, that must happen. Of course, they neglect the reality of human nature, and that once a tyrannical government is put into place, which is part of the process of Marxism, it will never relinquish its power. So there's a fundamental problem there. Also, if you're going to share material goods and give them to everybody, who's going to enforce that for the person who doesn't want to be part of your little game? This philosophy, in fact, if consistent, would do away with the category of truth altogether, but its adherents, innocent of thought that is either consistent or profound, seem unaware of its fatal contradiction. The contradiction may be seen on a less abstract level in the altruistic and idealistic practice of, for example, the Russian nihilist of the last century, a practice and flagrant contradiction of their purely materialistic and egotistic theory. Vladimir Solovyevo, I guess, Vladimir Solovyevo cleverly pointed out this discrepancy by ascribing to them the syllogism, man is descended from a monkey, consequently, we shall love one another. That's an interesting statement. But yeah, this is true. They just materialistic, egotistic, they're going to fix the world. This was Marx himself. By the way, folks, Marxism, we call it that, but there were a lot of people thinking about socialism in the day. Marx was just some guy that, got some popularity more or less because of his theory. And he has a historicist type economic, sociological view, but his conclusions weren't quite correct. He didn't understand basic market theories and economics, honestly, and was disproven very, very quickly afterwards, especially as the laissez-faire world came to prominence from basically the 1880s until the 1920s, before the hardcore progressive era started. All philosophy presupposes, to some degree, the autonomy, ideas, I guess it's supposed to be of, philosophical materialism is thus a species of idealism. It is, one might say, the self-confession of those whose ideas do not rise above the oblivious, whose thirst for truth is so easily assuaged by science that they make it into their absolute. See how I'm doing on time here. I'll read a couple more paragraphs here. It says, critical realism or positivism is the straightforward denial of metaphysical truth. Notice the critical part, right? We get into critical theory and all those things here. Proceeding from the same scientific predispositions as the more naive naturalism, it professes greater modesty in abandoning the absolute altogether and restricting itself to empirical relative truth. We have already noted the contradiction in this position. The denial of absolute truth is itself an absolute truth. Again, as with naturalism, the very positing of the first principle principle of positivism is its own refutation. Agnosticism, like realism, may be distinguished as naive and critical. Naive or doctrine agnosticism posits the absolute unknowability of an absolute truth. While its claims seem more modest even than the positivism, it still quite dearly claims too much. If it actually knows that the absolute is unknowable, then this knowledge is itself absolute. Such agnosticism is in fact but a very positivism, attempting with no great success to cover up its contradiction. And I've said this for a long time. When it comes to agnosticism, you don't know. I think that is the better line of judgment, like I understand, than just saying I'm an atheist, because you say I don't know. But here he makes the point. How can you know you don't know? See, that's a point where the agnostic decides, well, I can't prove God or these metaphysical things, therefore I'm just kind of stuck in between and cannot take a position. But you can't disprove it either. And there are proofs. You just have to know what you're looking at. And most people reject them offhand because they don't know them well. And then you get folks like Lee Strobel, who was an atheist, right? And he goes out and he starts looking at the proofs of Christianity, and he becomes a Christian because he can't deny the reality of it after a certain period of time. And so, let's keep going. Only in critical or pure agnosticism do we find at last what seems to be a successful renunciation of the absolute. Unfortunately, such renunciations entails the renunciation of everything else that and ends if it is consistent in total salafism. Such I'm getting very tongue-tied, folks, so I'm going to have to end after this paragraph because it's just the way it's going to go. Such agnosticism is the simple statement of fact. We do not know whether there exists an absolute truth or whether its nature could be if it did exist. This is the corollary, content ourselves with the empirical relative truth we can know. But what is truth? What is knowledge? If there is no absolute standard by which these are to be measured, they cannot even be defined. The agnostic, if he acknowledges the criticism, does not allow it to disrupt him. His position is one of pragmatism and experimentalism, instrumentalism. There is no truth, but man can survive, can get along in the world without it. Such a position has been defended in high places and in very low places as well in our anti-intellectualist century, but the least one can say of it is that it is intellectually irresponsible. It is the definitive abandonment of truth, or rather the surrender of truth to power. Where have I heard that statement? Speaking truth to power. This is postmodernism, guys. Whether that power be nation, race, class, comfort, or whatever other cause is able to absorb the energies of men once devoted to the truth. Good thing I'm stopping there. Sorry about the tongue-tiedness. But yeah, like obviously this is a very verbose text. Very wordy. But hey guys, I will come back to this. I hope you enjoyed this. This is kind of a deeper, philosophical dive. It's not the most easy thing to understand, but I hope you are tracking, you are understanding that this is a dissection of arguments from leftists written in the 50s and 60s, guys, written a long time ago. The 60s, right when the postmodernists were entering the United States and spreading this stuff. And it should tell you how far back this stuff goes. So it's very, very important. But with all that, guys said, hey, this has been All Minus One Story Time, and I will return tomorrow with my quick shot segments and some more on the Chinese century. With all that, I wish you all well.